By the time I was 21, my name or the store name started showing up like in Guitar Player magazine. But people, the interviewers were going, well, where'd you get this Les Paul special? The phone's ringing and, there are guys, like Brad Sarno, who you may have mentioned, and Jeff Schnook, Brian Simpson. I mean, those guys got used to having Billy Gibbons or whoever else, call on the phone and, having to carry on a normal conversation with them without stuttering or, I was doing these road trips with Bill, and he had gone to Notre Dame with my late friend Jim Wald, and Jim ended up being one of the best friends I've had in my life and an integral part of life as I know it. If you follow Derek and Susan Trucks, pardon me, at some point you'll see, some amount of information about buying my 59 Flying V. And Jim gave it to me after the second time I flew out to Seattle to stop him from committing suicide in 79. And that whole story, I'd started to go into, I was doing band management, concert productions, and everybody walked. But Derek, you, if you follow Derek and Susan, are well worth it. I think they're the best touring band there is in this country and have been for years. I started, when I was doing road trips, guitar hunting trips, I started noticing some of the stores were declining, especially in the small towns. Some were going down and some were getting bigger, better, new locations, building. Uncle Bob Massey in Joplin ended up building a new building, and he, I still refer to him as Uncle Bob. And we, as it turned out, he almost died in May of last year. Without going into that, but first Flying V I got. If you look at the back of Pete Townsend's Chinese Eyes album cover, there's Townsend like this with the Flying V. Well, that's thanks to Bob Massey down in Joplin. It was brought, Verlene Smith then brought it into his store to get it restrung, and it was in there, and he called me up, and he was trying to buy it, but Bob used to come up with incredible guitars. I mean, he was another guy that started with nothing,
Yeah.
And what would happen is we'd do a road trip. I'd get on the phone, call, Joe Walsh and whoever else, and sell the guitars and get them to whichever repair guy that I had, preferably Worthington, because he was the best one until '97 when I started working with John Mondine, who had been at Dale's for, I think, 9.5 years. But John didn't do finishing work, and Rich didn't like to do electronics. John, because of his neighbors, can't do finishes at his place over in East Alton, but he's great with electronics and basic setups, and he's done, 4 guitars now for Clapton, and, stuff for Joe Walsh, Howard Leese, everything he's bought. A bunch of guys. I mean, it's like all the touring band people since '97, and the first Clapton one was actually in '94, before the From the Cradle tour, and that guitar apparently is one of the primary guitars that was used for that album, which went multi-platinum in about 10 seconds. That was one of the best tours Clapton ever did, and then it was the whole tour was sold out, and so in '95 he did another From the Cradle tour, just plain old blues songs, and they'd show, slides or video on the sides of the stage of who actually did the songs originally or had the hits back in the 40s or 50s of them. And, it was great. And Eric was having a blast. I was involved, had been invited to be involved in the first Wooden Music vintage guitar show on North Lincoln Avenue in Chicago in March of '73. It was literally the first one in the country. And it got to the point for a while, I guess back in the '90s, where there were so many shows, there'd be multiple ones in a weekend, and they spread to Europe. I don't know whether they were having them in Japan or not. I don't remember. But the shows, the vintage guitar shows, became a huge deal. I mean, huge. And but we did the first ones, and I think it was around '78. A guy named John Brinkman, who was from Waco, Texas, was up in Chicago on business, and that we're doing a vintage guitar show, and came over there, and we invited him in the back to drink beer and have free make sandwiches and just hang out with the dealers, and the good customers. There's some guys, there's some bar band out of Rockford called Cheap Trick. I don't know what happened with them. That Richard Nielsen, Ralph, son of Ralph Nielsen Music of Rockford, used to come in there. And Rick, in '79 or '80, when they started getting big, bought like 24 guitars and amps from me just in a year or two. But we're doing Rick's work. We've glossed over, other than mentioning Worthington multiple times. Rich was so good at finishing work, fret jobs, setups, that guys like Walsh, Marshall George, a late friend from Marshall Tucker Band, all these guys were going, who knew about Worthington, were, if they're coming in a day ahead, or it was like that Bad Company thing in '99, where we got to get this guitar ready to use on stage tonight. And that was part of it. I mean, when I had people going, like Gary Richrath, when Ario was big, called me from Miami, from Criteria Studios. One afternoon, he goes, I need a Gretsch. I need that classic Gretsch tone for rhythm for this song on this, that we're doing right now. Do you have any? I said, yeah, I got a late '50s Gretsch Country Club. It's basically a white Falcon without the gold glitter and the white finish and giant headstock. And he goes, okay, I'll take it. How fast can you get it down here? And I said, well, pack it up now and take it out. Next flight, TWA, next flight out to Miami. Well, the sad part, the good news is I had 40 Sunburst Les Pauls. Not conversions as they're called, but real ones. The bad news is most of them were back when they were $2,000 to $5,000, $7,500. Ed King, who came up with the cool guitar line for Sweet Home Alabama, what he was best known for, ended up with my last one, which is this gorgeous '60 Sunburst Les Paul that's in multiple books. One thing I'll mention, in addition to this situation, is I ended up, that I know of, in 36 American, British, and Japanese guitar books. They tagged it Ed's, the Ed Burst, as I called it. Worked on a Sunburst Les Paul calendar with somebody, and I don't remember who it was. I just remember the pictures are good. Mine's in there as the Seelig Burst. And, Ed had told me in advance, I think in an email, that he had insisted that they do that. And I said, hey, I'm good with Ed Burst. I think it's funny that takes it back to 1981 as it is. And he goes, no, it was your guitar. I had it for whatever number of years was, but not, 3 years, 5 years. I don't remember. And St. Louis guy, Vince Canetto, was the first one doing relics, aging them for Fender. That was a crazy story. He was doing Fender, old 50s Fender decals. Well, to do restorations on old guitars, I ordered Broadcaster, Precision Bass, Telecaster, and Les Paul Junior ones. We had one point we were restoring 2 juniors, and the junior ones, those Les Paul ones, it was actually stenciled. It wasn't a decal, but what are you going to do if you're not Gibson, in the repair shop? Vince, who's back in St. Louis, had told me the story. He's going, yeah, I stick the things in the freezer. When Fender finally started doing 57 reissue Strats and 52 reissue Telecasters and whatever, and had called him up and said, well, Keith doesn't want to take his vintage guitars on tour because they're going to get wrecked, And, we're wondering whether you can take some of these new reissues and make them look old. But Vince had been selling them decals, and, I don't remember how exactly that transpired, but he goes, oh, yeah. And he was laughing. He was going, yeah, I'll put them up on the roof, when it's in the summer, so they're getting baked, and then stick them in the freezer and vice versa, and, drop them out on the gravel driveway or wherever. But, I know Murphy was doing some of the same stuff, and, taking a buffing, attachment for the drill, around where the finish off on the, in the forearm area on the back, but was literally dropping them on the driveway to get, like feigned belt buckle marks on them. I had said that there was a conversation actually at LaRusso's one night when we're, Matt Umanoff, who opened a store with his first wife at age 20 in Greenwich Village. Well, Matt's store was Stephen Stills when he was trying to be a folkie, hung out there. Bob Dylan for years kept going back, even and well into the 90s or later would just, hang out and just try to be left alone or try out guitars and be Bob Zimmerman from Hibbing, Minnesota. It was one of the two big hangouts back when I was still a kid, in Greenwich Village. But we had a dinner, and I can remember when it was because I remember the girl that I was dating, or woman that I was dating at that point was after I got divorced. And this particular woman had been the girlfriend of the Allman Brothers sound man when Layla was being recorded. And there's this famous story about Tom Dowd taking Clapton to see the Allman Brothers band. But I know there's a tape, because I have it, a cassette, bootleg that's not so good. So I used to joke it was from before stage monitors were invented. Clearly at one point, Duane and Clapton are not in the same key. But so Dowd and Clapton, I think, were seen in the front row right in front of Duane, and he looked down and saw him. And Allman Brothers were not big yet. That didn't happen, really didn't happen. They were just starting to get big around, I want to say July of 71. And I actually, this really long story, and some of it's documented, some isn't. But I was selling Duane a Firebird, and I may have emailed you about that. But we were going to finish the deal, get confirmation done. Check will go out tomorrow from the manager, for this Firebird that he'd been wanting to buy. And he actually woke me up the morning the day that he got killed on his motorcycle. I was 19 at the time. It just, it's one of those deals. I've never been entirely the same. My buddy Warren Haynes and Alan Woody had middleman the deal, called Dickie and from Mississippi Nights, and said, well, this friend of ours has 3 dot inlay 335s. They're 2 cherry ones. And, when I was talking to Warren about it, he goes, well, would you sell one? I said, I hadn't planned on it because Dickie really wants to get one. And as I found out from Dickie after he got it in his hands, and it actually became his favorite guitar, Duane Betts still uses it on the road, and it is unrecognizable. It's so beaten up. And when I got it, traded for it, there was one little wear mark down the bare wood, like right here. And, it's in that one and the other one are in Rick Nielsen's book, among other guitars. And, but you can see the wear mark in there. But, I've got video of him using it on Letterman's show, and I mean, he used it as his main touring guitar for ages. But the Duane thing was just horrible. He was supposed to call me at 6 o'clock when he got home, and the accident was around 5:30. And when I didn't hear anything, I started calling him. And, the rule number one was, with touring bands, you do not call before noon, or 1 or 2, depending on who it was. Johnny Winter, didn't call before 4 o'clock, because Johnny, I vacationed with them and, was very involved with the situation. And we'd sit up at, once they had the penthouse, Susan would usually wander down the hall and go to bed at some sane hour, and Johnny and I would stay up till, sunrise. And I was standing at the front desk at the luxurious Lakeshore Holiday Inn. I'm an 18-year-old art school student here. Walsh, Fox, Peters, this is their, road manager, who it turned out stole at least $25,000 from them that they knew of, that they were, became aware of quickly once they started realizing that there was money disappearing. And I'm I'm an 18-year-old kid. It's Joe Walsh, James Gang starting to get bigger. They were playing whatever the equivalent is to our opera house there. And the arrangement was, it was $3,000, but if you sell it out, you get $5,000. And so that puts it in some perspective how, where they were in the food chain. And Cream, I think, played for like $3,000 at the Opera House here. And that didn't even sell out here till the night of the show. It's one of the big, best and biggest bands in the world. And one of the Wood Music shows, we figured out it had to be 79. Before going, I was at my ex-wife, girlfriend at the time, Beth, and I were having dinner over at my dad and stepmother's house, probably the weekend before we went up to North Lincoln Avenue for that. And she said, my stepmother said, oh, Jimmy, who I knew from camp up in Wisconsin. Fast forward, he ended up being this guy, Bob Rafelson's production assistant, and the one movie that was actually big at the time was The Postman Always Rings Twice with Jack Nicholson and Jessica Lange, and I just saw it on TCM within the last month. I hadn't seen that in years, and there at the end in the credits, James Halpern. But my stepmother said, "Oh, Jimmy's doing a Redford movie," and he had to find I don't know if he told me or she told me, but he was charged with finding an abandoned prison so they could shoot this Redford movie there. The downside, as it turned out, they got Rafelson pulled off the movie, and my stepbrother it was a 90-mile, roughly, commute back and forth between the Hilton in Columbus, Ohio, and the prison where they were shooting, whatever months that was. Fast forward, we're up in Chicago. I don't remember how the guy found out, but he was doing the Redford movie, Brubaker. And he goes, I'm doing this scene where I wrote this song and I want to play a real National Steel in my cell for this scene in the movie. Do you have one? Pete Allenov of St. Paul, who, opened his store when he was like 6 years old. I mean, I think Pete literally was like 18. So, Pete had a National there. I think Bill Camp or Jim Beach, who owned Wooden, had one. But I remember at least two of the dealers had Nationals. And I had brought a National Duolian, the one gray, it's referred to the galvanized steel trash can looking finish, kind of a crystalline type finish. And that's usually what you see are those old beat up duolians, or occasionally the triolians, which are fake wood grain. But, the expense ones were the nickel silver plated ones, like Johnny Winter, had on one album cover. And the one that made national Stylos big was there was a Dire Straits album cover. This guy calls up and, I need it, do you have one? And the other Pete, and the other, we all three of us talked about it, and they're all like, I don't know what this guy is. And I said, well, I think he may be working on the movie that my stepbrother's working on. And so I talked to him and I said, let me make a phone call and call you back if that works for you. I'll call you right back. I called my stepmother because, and he said, well, we're staying at the Columbus Hilton, which, by the way, unless there's more than one, and there may be, but doubtful, that's where Clapton was putting his band for the tour that Derek Trucks did with him in 06, 07. I think it was the St. Louis show was, I think, the first one after one or two Madison Square Garden sold out shows. Then they came here. That's a great story. I mean, that's one of those, start to finish. Chuck Berry, Charles Jr. and I were there. I guess listed him, and we literally got a private concert, Delta Blues, Eric Clapton, Derek Trucks, and for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then for about the last 5 minutes, Doyle Bramall Jr. was walking by or looking for us, heard this, authentic Delta Blues drifting down the hallway to the other dressing rooms. He jumped in, grabbed the guitar, started playing, left-handed, upside down, right-handed guitar. But while it was going on, Junior and I kept looking at each other like, this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and they obviously, after they left the room to go get ready to do this show, we were both around this stuff enough to know this. It may happen again to some degree if Derek does another tour with him. And that was the assumption, was that Derek, I didn't even ask. I sort of asked Eric for contact info, and I said, no, I'll just get it from Derek, assuming, he's just going to stay in the band. And, the actual arrangement was he had, given up his band. And, I guess by that point it was Derek and Susan's band, Tedeschi Trucks band, and his Allman Brothers gigs for over a year to be in the Eric Clapton band as, a hired gun and well paid. And I mean, when he was telling me about it, he's going, oh yeah, well, we're, rehearsing in France, and, Clapton's yacht, Blue Guitar, I believe was the name of it. And I said, so, well, joking with Derek, because I'd known him since he was 20, only since he was 20, not since he was like 6, 12, 14. I mean, there's some incredible pictures of this little 12 or 14-year-old kid looking up at Joe Walsh, and he, playing and stuff with them, playing with the Allman Brothers, looking up. Literally, he's a kid, little kid, playing with them and keeping up, which is amazing. I mean, you just, listen to, you can, find this stuff on YouTube. There's one of him playing Layla when he was 12 or 14 years old. And every time I see it, I'm like, how is this even possible? That this kid, he was better at that age than most adults ever get. But, so, the Clapton thing was incredible. I mean, it was... And Derek bought a birthday present for Susan, a blue floral telly, and I figured, since he had told me that they were flying, I thought, well, and he takes his guitar with him to the hotel rooms, and the obvious thing was, well, sacrifice one of my white Gibson Skylarks that I'd had for decades to him, so he had an amp he could carry with him. Walsh flew me to Chicago to finish the thing finally. The road manager's handing out the keys, and I'm standing there going, "Where's my key?" And he's going, "You're sharing a room with Walsh." And I look up at Joe and I go, "Are you all right with that?" And he goes, "Yeah, come on." And again, I'm an 18-year-old kid. James Gang's starting to get big. This guy is clearly a unique guitar player. I mean, this is way, 5 years before he's in the Eagles. And I'm sharing a room with him for 2.5 days. And it was, big brother, little brother all weekend. And went to a bar with him and saw him sit in with Chicago legends, Baby Huey and the Babysitters, I think it was. Weir's favorite guitar for decades. I know I'm trying to remember one. I think I sold to him in 73. A Sunburst Inlay 335, and there is plenty of video of him playing that. And there's a documentary that Netflix did called The Other One. And in the beginning of it, they're showing Weir talking about his guitars, and he points at this Sunburst Inlay 335. And I ran into him. They did a show as Rat Dog opening for Little Feat at the Fox. And I was down there that afternoon trying to sell guitars. And Weir finished his sound check. I was walking by and I said, "Hey, Bob, I'm the one that sold you your Sunburst 60 Inlay 335. And he goes, "Yeah, great guitar." But at some point we talked about it a little bit more, and he goes, and in fact, I can tell you when it was, because, Warren Haynes is a good friend, and Jimmy Herring were in Phil and Friends. And then both of them were in the Dead for whatever, one or more tours. They were trying to get Haynes to make a long-term commitment to him. And Warren told me at one point, he said, they keep trying to get me to do it and offering me more and more money, because those are big boots to fill.